Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins. Today you're in for a treat. I'm joined by Katherine Melchior Ray. Katherine, you're very welcome to the show. Just a little bit about Katherine. She's the president of Globe Alley and a keynote speaker, a consultant, a faculty member. She'll tell us all about that. And this is going to be a great discussion because there's a little book in the mix too, which I know is going to be of interest to our international audience. But Katherine, welcome to VistaTalks.
Thanks, Simon. I'm so excited to be here. I've listened to many of your other podcasts, and I think we met originally several years ago on a CMO council.
That's right. We did indeed on a CMO council. That seems like an age ago now. It wasn't that long ago, actually, Katherine. Yeah. Look, let's jump into it if I can, if you don't mind, because your career, or your global career, I should say, it spans leadership roles at we use the term iconic brands, whether it's Nike or Louis Vuitton or, lots of them. You can tell us a bit more about that. But take me back a little bit, if you don't mind, to the beginning of that journey and the spark, the passion, because you're connecting people and cultures to this day. Where's all that come from, Katherine? Take us back a little bit. Tell us.
Yeah. I grew up in San Francisco back in the day. So not the San Francisco Silicon Valley that we think of today, but the Silicon Valley of not Levi's in the 1800s, but of the Gap, actually. It was the era of the Gap and Esprit. And but beyond the fashion part, it was the era of Little Italy. And literally, we went there after high school to go and get coffees. And Chinatown was and still is, I think, the largest, if not Vancouver, the largest population of Chinese outside mainland China. So I grew up celebrating Chinese New Year at the end of January, early February, as much as American New Year. It was just part of our culture. We would go to the Mission District, which today has high rent for all the people who work at Google and Salesforce, but before was really inhabited by Latinos, and it had the best Mexican food north of Los Angeles. So it really was a very international culture. Meanwhile, I am first generation. My father escaped Nazi Germany and settled in San Francisco. My mom is from the East Coast, so she's not at all from that background. They married across culture, if you will, and they put my sister and me into French schools not because they necessarily wanted us to be global citizens, but simply it was a matter of choice. The public schools were not so good. The private schools they felt were too elitist. And obviously, my father escaping Hitler was not going to put me into a Catholic school. So I grew up in a very cosmopolitan, global city in the middle of the United States. And I think I attribute a lot of it to that because foreign cultures, foreign languages, foreign foods were all a part of the matrix of my youth.
Thank you for sharing that. And that really is the spark and the catalyst and that sort of multicultural environment. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about this word culture, and particularly cultural intelligence. And the reason I want to ask you about that is because a lot of brands today, we know they want to grow internationally. We know they want to sell products and services across multiple borders, jurisdictions, languages, cultures, etc. And you talk a little bit about sort of that strategic cultural intelligence being a real skill that needs to be understood, learned, mastered even. How do you define cultural intelligence, Katherine? What does it mean when I throw those words at you?
Yeah. Well, let's break it down, right? Culture is officially defined as collective programming. That's as simple as that. And I think that's helpful because sometimes these very complex and opaque words can be very intimidating. And when you think of it that way, you realize there are lots of different kinds of culture, certainly family cultures, national cultures, corporate cultures. But when I'm talking about cultural intelligence, I'm thinking about explicitly different cultures, American culture, Italian culture, Japanese culture, Indian culture. And sure, even within those, there are many different regional variations and even family structures, as we said, national corporate structures. So there are lots of different levels of culture, but that's basically what that refers to. So when you add intelligence to it, it refers to the ability to see and to bridge cultural differences, which are often hidden. So, I think emotional intelligence is something that people talk about a lot today, the ability to sense the emotion in a room. And cultural intelligence takes it one step further. Emotional intelligence is certainly a part of it because in many cultures, communication is not always verbal. And particularly for Americans, where we have a very litigious society and we think if it's not in the contract, I didn't commit to it, or it's not a part of what we discussed. Many other cultures have forms of communication that are just as strong as verbal, but they're nonverbal. And so this is why it goes one step further than the emotional intelligence of sensing someone else's needs, to really combine both the heart and the head with the intelligence of understanding their culture explicitly. And there are actually 4 steps to cultural intelligence, so I'm happy to break down for you. But the 4th step is practice. And it's because when I defined it, I said it's the ability to see it and to bridge it. So it requires the practice of culture flexing, understanding that culture, understanding your own behavior outside it or within it, and being able to culture flex between different cultures. So for instance, I'm an American. I live half of the year in France. I've lived in Japan for 9 years. We can get into that. And, if the phone rings and it's a Japanese person on the phone, I immediately shift my tone, obviously my language, my grammar, and my way of being. My husband laughs at me because I start to shake my head like I'm bowing. Even though it's just an audio conversation, but it's all part of communication.
Yeah, and the word programming, I think you used as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the world, at least the more my career progressed and hopefully continues to progress, the more you realize that cultures, to me, they come across almost as little bubbles across the world. And sometimes you don't appreciate the other bubbles, the other cultures. You don't really fully, and when you immerse yourself, travel is great for that, isn't it? Because
Yes.
you immerse
Travel's great for
yourself in
that.
it, and it helps. And I'm going to come back to Japan, all things Japanese, in a moment. But let's talk about the book. I want to bring the book in now, Katherine, if I can. And you were talking about 4 steps as well, so maybe we can cover a couple of those things. Thank you very much. Brand Global, Adapt Local. What a great title. You're exploring how brands thrive. I was talking about businesses that want to grow internationally, but they need to adapt to that cultural nuance that we're just touching on. What about a couple of examples or just insights from the book that help maybe bring this to life a little bit for us?
Sure. Well, I can give you several. One of them is if a provocative example of why this matters. For instance, so I talk about it. And it's from my own experience. I specialize between Japan and France. That's really kind of one of my sweet spots because I speak French and I speak Japanese, and I've worked in luxury, and both of those cultures have very developed luxury industries. And so I was working for a French fashion brand called Comptoir des Cotonniers that had been purchased by Uniqlo's parent company, Fast Retailing. And we were working on expanding their business. That was what I was hired to come in and do. And the Japanese managers, remember, Uniqlo mindset, came in and they said, well, we think you need more basics. We just need more basics in the line. That's one of the problems. And the French merchandisers were like, ah, non, c'est pas vrai. That's not true. We have lots of basics. If anything, we actually need more signature pieces. So they were going back and forth on whether they needed basics. And I'm thinking, okay, how are we going to resolve this? Do we or don't we? And it was only when we did ethnographic research we were talking to French women, and we actually followed a woman, and I saw this in the video, so this is also important. I saw in the video, she walked into her bedroom and pulled out of her armoire a top and said, you know, j'adore, c'est basique. And I realized right then we had different things in our heads. So if you, Simon, think of what's a basic t-shirt, what do you think of?
Just plain cotton, white, black t-shirt. Yeah, no logo,
Yeah,
no brand, right? Basic.
right. And shape?
Regular cut, round neck,
Yeah.
crew neck, something
Round
like
neck,
that.
short
Yeah.
sleeve shirt, white cotton. Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly, I think, what most people think of. Well, what the woman pulled out of her closet was indeed white. It was indeed round necked, short sleeves, and cotton, but it was lace.
Ah,
It was lace.
okay.
And so for her, she said, c'est un basique, you know, she thought that was basic. So it's really incredible because the Japanese, they're both using the same English word, but in their imagination, they were thinking of different things. Japan had one expectation in their mind, while the French had another. And so you can see that even the most basic things are anything but. So, you know, I actually went even further to really understand this word basic. You know, most of the time we think of basic as simple, plain, and neutral. And in French, however, it can be foundational, right? So when you take that into French fashion, you realize it could mean go-to items that are the foundation of your wardrobe around which you can build things. And of course, lace is that for a French woman. It just is a little bit of chic in your day-to-day. It could be under a jacket or at night, but it doesn't have to be. And so that gives us a real clear definition of what's at stake in this, and how this notion of brand global, adapt local, if you're building a brand and you're trying to position it in one place, if you say basic, you're going to have one idea in one culture and many other ideas in another culture. So you really have to understand your values are universal. You know, you want to have simple go-to key items in your wardrobe, but how those values come to life across culture differs. So you wanted a good example of it, and it's one of my favorites. I have loved Kit Kat for years. Because one of the reasons is that I go back and forth to Japan, and I have for decades. And I used to always stop at Narita Airport and get little omiyage or gifts for people back home. And I would always get all these Kit Kat bars because they have, if anyone who's traveled to Japan knows, they have matcha, azuki bean, you know, cherry blossom, all these crazy flavors. And so I've always was fascinated by Kit Kat. And when I did the book, I actually interviewed a woman who'd been a Kit Kat manager for Nestle. It's now owned by Nestle. It's originally an English brand, but it's owned now by Nestle in Switzerland, and it's sold in 14 countries. And they have an approach that I think is really key. They determine what are the hallmarks of the Kit Kat brand that can't be changed. What's the framework? What are the key tenets that must be honored for all markets in every country? And where do we allow our regional teams to have freedom? So there's a great story about, it's the #1 chocolate bar in Malaysia. However, around COVID, we all remember this, people were getting more interested in healthy foods, right? It's like we were all sitting around and eating bonbons. And so, you know, for a chocolate bar, that's a real problem. What do you do? Well, you know, you can change the ingredients to some degree and make it healthier. Dark cocoa actually is a healthier chocolate than when it's mixed with a lot of milk and sugar. And the second problem that Malaysia had, remember, #1 chocolate bar, so the pressure was on, and was a supply chain problem. We all remember that too from COVID. And what most people don't know is that I believe it's over 70% of cocoa comes from Africa, from Ghana. And there was supply, so not only was there climate change and dry conditions, but supply chain were slowing things down. They came up with a solution that solved both the supply chain and the taste dynamic that was changing in the market, because Malaysia has one of the largest rainforests in the world. And they realized that they could work with local farmers to shift some of their crops from bad palm oil, we don't like palm oil, into cocoa that actually increased their profits and increased the benefit on the climate and on the fertile soil. So they shifted that, and that produced rainforest cocoa produces the less sweet, darker chocolate. So the taste profile of their local cocoa plants produced a taste profile that met with the local audience. So they created a whole new chocolate bar called Kit Kat Dark Borneo, 52%. They actually named the percentage of cocoa in there. And that it did so well. It grew their business, but and so you can see several things from this I think it's a great example. And if I could show you the packaging, you can find it online, but it combines images of a local hornbill bird from the forest and this Rafflesia colorful, very Polynesian looking flower from Malaysia. So it both visually looks like a local bar, but it also looks like a global Kit Kat bar. And it represents one of the frameworks I talk about in the book about freedom within a framework. So Kit Kat, for instance, you can see the framework, Kit Kat, all Kit Kat bars have that same red logo. We all know it. You can see it in a store. And you expect it to be that finger-like structure, right? Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 4. And it always has wafer. So those are the 3 things that are sacrosanct about Kit Kat. And yet beyond that, the local teams are allowed to create different flavors, different seasonal ideas. And that's what creates the strength of a global brand and the flexibility to be locally relevant.
I love that example. I mean, we've gone from lace basics, we've talked about people's perception of that. We've ended up at Kit Kats, and to me, it's a real product market fit at a time that was important, and also culturally resonating with the culture and the audience that it's trying to reach. I mean, what great examples. Thanks for sharing those, Katherine.
Yeah.
That's very, very good. And let's talk a bit more then about, because we've mentioned, where have we been so far? We've been to Malaysia, Japan. We've talked about the US, we've talked about Germany, of course, we've talked about France. But I want to talk a little bit about teams, working with people, because we all work, a lot of people now may not even go to a head office anymore. We work in very different ways. Some people are in office, some people are hybrid, some people are fully remote. We work probably more now with freelancers or solo entrepreneurs. But I want to ask you about leading teams. So whether that's in Japan, across Europe, across the US, you must have learned some key lessons across your career about managing across those cultures, because the same way that Kit Kat product market fit, here's the 10 things we must do, or the 3 things we must do. But within, outside of that, you can sort of tailor things a little bit. When you're working across multicultural environments, across different countries, diverse global teams, how are you going to build that trust, that cohesion that's required in today's fast environment to actually succeed? Because it's not easy. It's not easy, Katherine.
No, it's not easy. And I think you mentioned lots of things in there that are true. One is whether you're managing teams in Europe, in a European country, or in an Asian country, or in the US, and often we're managing teams from those locations, but that are global, right? So nowadays everyone gets on the Zoom call, and they're from multiple geographies, and you're all finding a common culture. So, and I talk about both of these in the book. So it's called Brand Global, Adapt Local, but it doesn't just mean consumer-driven marketing. It's also about building brand teams. Because what I found is creating that unified team that can brand global, adapt local helps you create the marketing towards the consumer. The more integrated your teams are, both as a group and with the shared values of the brand, the more you can rest assured that everyone in their own area doing their individual work will be bringing to life those brands in a way that is regionally relevant to their consumer. So this is one of the key ideas, I think, is that this notion, many of the ideas of marketing to a consumer or a customer, if you're in B2B, are the same ideas that we need internally to work with our teams. It's not so much to market to them, but to communicate with them. And cultural intelligence plays equally well in the inter-team department leadership as it does in the brand levels. Let me talk about what that means, because you mentioned another word that's really key here is the word trust, right? Trust is key for brands and in teams. So if we look at it, right, at the core of marketing anything is the brand promise. What is this brand promising to the consumer anywhere in the world? You know, we can talk about Nike, where I worked, since I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon, the Nike HQ. And if you're, you know, and it's actually one of the things Nike's trying to get back to, right? Is it a performance shoe? Is it a performance top? And that is their brand promise, that we're going to create some of the most innovative products and services that are going to help you be better, faster, stronger in whatever it is that you want to do and however you want to move your body, as they say now. That's the brand promise. And there's a level of trust, right? So everyone has to know what that brand is. It's going to create demand around those ideas, and then the products and services have to deliver it. And so trust is key. Trust is equally key in the teams. But what does trust really mean? You know, it's another opaque word, like we talked about with culture. And I have a definition of trust that I have used over the years, and it works across culture. There are basically three parts to trust. The first is shared values. If you don't have shared values, you can't start this notion of basics, right? We have different ideas. And so in order to really create common ground, you've got to, that's where culture comes in. You've got to, what I call, lower the waterline of culture. We need to make those hidden expectations explicit, right? We have to over discuss and over explain to some degree until we really have common values. So once you create those shared values, then you have to have open communication. Both sides have to feel like they can communicate. If it's a brand and the consumer, right? If the consumer has a problem, will the brand stand behind their product and service and be able to communicate with you? And in the teams, do people feel like they can really share openly? This is where often psychological safety comes in. We can break that down if you want, but it's the notion that came out of the Google study of how vulnerability in a team is one of the key things to allow you to unlock the power of diversity. I know I'm using lots of words, but it's true. And vulnerability is really different across culture. Some cultures have a real problem with it. So how you do that, you know, how you create that open communication is really key. The third part of trust is a history of promises kept. You have to keep your promises. This is obvious in the brand, right? If my shoe falls apart, I'm not going to believe that the brand is going to deliver on the highest performance products. If and in a team, obviously, if someone fails to do what they've said they're going to do, you're not going to trust them the next time. So it's really important to think of those three aspects of trust, and you can see how culture plays across all three of them. And this is why cultural intelligence is so key to lead a global team. And it all starts with having an open mindset. You know, you have to really be curious to people's differences and, you know, replace fear and judgment with that kind of curiosity. And that will allow you to become more observant, to understand the culture, and to practice the kind of leadership that allows everyone to be an authentic and innovative individual.
I really like that, Katherine. That's really good. and explicit, lowering the waterline, if I picked that up correctly. I think that's so important, sort of re-communicating, over-communicating almost. And vulnerability, great to touch on that, because it's often sometimes the secret ingredient, isn't it, that gets overlooked or locked out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think that that's one of those lessons. People have to learn this themselves. It's kind of one of those really hard, bittersweet, powerful lessons that people learn. I think everyone will remember once they learn this, where it was they learned it. Because I know I grew up, I mean, I've had a very long and fun career across lots of brands, as you say, and a leader in many roles. And I used to think power is about hard power. And it was when I had some real issues, and I actually lost my job, and I faced humiliation, embarrassment, imposter syndrome, and spent a lot of time working through that. That's the second book. It's not out yet. But I talk about how I finally understood this notion of vulnerability, despite my not wanting to believe it, right? People push vulnerability away. They're afraid that it shows weakness, and it's actually just the opposite.
Yeah, I like that. And that sort of contrast between, if I can use the term, hard power, as you said there, and soft power, that they can be both extremely useful. But that soft power, that sometimes the person in the room who isn't the loudest, who's doing the thinking, who's doing the listening, has great things to contribute. And I really appreciate you bringing that to life. And you mentioned Nike, of course, and I wanted to mention Nike too, because I think you're involved in the "if you let me play" stuff, which was huge, but also redefining luxury at Hyatt as well, another brand that maybe we can touch on. And you obviously have to be very creative and innovative while being, I suppose, grounded in what they need, their ethos, and also with that mindset to connect and resonate across cultures. Anything from your those sort of big plays, whether it was Nike, Hyatt, or elsewhere, that you could bring to life for me, Katherine?
Sure. I mean, I'm very aware that I've had an unusual career because I've worked across 5 different industries. I think it's what makes me a good teacher. I teach at Berkeley Haas Business School, and the students they're always wanting more stories from me rather than the work we need to do. And I realize they're just trying to make classes easier. But I do share stories when they're relevant. And I explain that, my ability to shift from one industry to another, and people might say, well, what were they? I'll just tell you. I started in television. I started in Japanese television, right? Media, crazy, weird, and it was all of that. But that's what honed my storytelling skills. And then I moved in, and the bulk of my career was in retail and fashion, whether it was sportswear, or high fashion with Louis Vuitton and Gucci. And then I moved into hospitality, where I led the luxury brands for Hyatt, Park Hyatt and Grand Hyatt. And then I was CMO back in Tokyo for Shiseido. So I went into cosmetics. And then finally, I went into tech because I realized, as I was leading a global digital transformation for my Shiseido teams, that as a marketer, I had to get into tech. I had to sort of cut my own teeth on it, or I would lose my own relevance. And so how do you cross industries and still be relevant yourself, right, as a marketer? And the thing is, you have to learn each business model, obviously. So your learning curve is very steep. You have to not be afraid of being thrown into the deep end. But marketing as a whole has the same key approaches. It requires three things. The first is you have to understand your brand. What are its values? Again, which those are universal, that brand promise. What are those? And again, if everyone around the world on these teams all understand those internally, then you're already a step ahead in the foundation. The second part is to understand your market. That's the key part of marketing. That's why it's called marketing. And your market's always changing. Who's your target? What world are they living in, and what are their values, and how are those values? And Understanding then how their values are changing brings you to the third part, which is the creative part, is how can I take these brand values that are universal, and while I'm looking at a dynamic, evolving, competitive marketplace, bring our values to life, not necessarily where the market is now, because, well, let's face it, I work at some of the most well-known competitive brands. It's competitive. So you got to be out in front. So you can't just play where the market is. You have to look at where the market is going. And you have to be, and this is one of the things my students told me to put in the book, one of my beliefs, you have to be, I say, a half step ahead of the market. If you're a full step ahead, and I have been, you're wrong, you're off. It won't get traction. It's a good idea, but for a different time. And I've had this happen a couple times where I believed in something incredible. Like I was back at Nike running women's footwear when we were launching the sports bra. I mean, that was like a long time ago. And I wanted to do fashion shows. And everyone was like, no, 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 we won't do that. That's the F word, that's crazy. Today, Nike does fashion shows. So it wasn't the fact that it was the wrong idea, it was just not the right idea at the right time. So if you're too far out in front, you're missing the market. But if you're even at the market or a half step behind, you're leaving a little space for a competitor to sneak right in. And so that's where I say you've got to learn to be a half step ahead of the market. And so those are really the same three things. I can't do that magic for you unless, of course, I'm on the inside or working as a consultant. But it's those three steps that are key. And then every brand is different, every market is different, and the market's always changing, which is what's exciting about this world. And then you have to bring your creativity anchored in the brand and inspired by the market to find that sweet spot of opportunity.
Yeah, I love it. And it's the old saying, isn't it? Go to where the puck is, going to be, not necessarily where it's at now. But
Exactly.
I love the half step approach, because today's business world, maybe it's always been like this, but it just feels like it changes so quickly now.
So
The news
quickly.
cycle, the global news, the bad news, the good news, the trends, it's just so fast. I mean, fast fashion is a term that we use a lot
Yeah.
nowadays.
And that even seems slow these days compared
Right,
to,
right.
AI.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just thinking about the half step, because sometimes you can be not just a step ahead, but maybe 3 or 4 steps down the road. And if you're wrong, it's a heck of a problem. And that half
Yep.
step is kind of like, we're keeping the competition out, we're showing foresight, but we're also, it's timing, I suppose, is what we come back to, isn't it? As well, like your idea of the fashion shows at Nike, a great idea, but needs to be executed when the moment's right. And that half step approach seems very sensible. I like that a
Yeah.
lot, Catherine. And
Thanks.
we mentioned the Haas School of Business, UC Berkeley. Tell us a bit about what you're doing there, because I know like they're renowned, and you're helping to build these sort of next generation of leaders that are coming through places like UC Berkeley. But the skills, mindset shifts that I think need to be taking place now, they seem to be very critical for students, MBA students in particular. You mentioned AI, it's culturally complex out there, like we've touched on. What are your thoughts? You got involved in there, you're sort of shaping people and how they learn and what information they take away. It's critical for the next generation coming through, isn't it?
Yeah, it is critical. I love teaching at Berkeley for the combined aspect of getting to know these students. They're incredibly varied, energetic, creative, eager to learn, very diverse. I mean, we have a lot of global students, and I'm a huge supporter of this notion of global participation, because not only for teaching the students from foreign countries, but how they help the local students learn, because their knowledge is different. And just the conversation in the room, I do a class on smartphones, and the Chinese students are aware of so many other brands that are not available in the United States, but that are competitive to the, Apple and the Google phones. And if they're going to go into that field, they have to be aware of those brands in a global marketplace. So it's really an exciting place to teach. I think there are a couple things at the foundational level. I've talked about mindset, you've mentioned it, and it is a growth mindset is one that is flexible and open. And having that growth mindset is key. If we think that the world is ordained to end up in a certain way, or we're trying to go back to a previous world, those are dead ends. They might sputter around and gain momentum temporarily, but in the long term, that's not where it's going. Everything keeps changing. And it might take, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you might think, oh, it's going back, but it won't. It will continue to take 2 steps forward. The world is always changing. So learning to learn, learning to adapt is one of the most important aspects of competitive growth in our society, whether you're as a team member or a leader or a business person, a teacher, a carpenter, whatever you're doing, having a growth mindset is critical. And I think the other thing I would say about that is, you mentioned AI, right? So what does that mean? The growth mindset helps with that. The growth mindset says, oh, okay, let me see how I can use AI. How will AI help me with my business? How can I use that tool? There have been so many tools that have come and gone over the years. Again, I started in television, right? I started in television, but I started in television, and we did a direct response program before the internet. So I was very numerical about how many people I spoke to, how many converted in my mindset, from day one, before the internet even existed. And now television, Japan is actually one of the few countries in the world where TV still reaches 90% of the households, right? It's kind of an outlier, but it's still true. So they have to support the previous foundation of media while learning all the new media for a while. Is it TikTok? Is it AI? The thing about AI, so you have to always learn how to use it. Any new tool is the same with that. But AI's Achilles heel is context, right? We know that. If you don't frame your question, you get a terrible response. The better you frame your question, the better you ask for what you're really looking for, the more you're leading it into the content you need, the better the response you get. Culture is its Achilles heel. If you just say, look, I'm going into a meeting, I need to know what to do, and you don't say you're going into a meeting in Japan, it's not going to know certain things about, okay, arrive early. You might say something, you may not even ask that. How does the concept of time change in Japan? If you know to ask, it might answer you properly. But if you're not aware of, again, these hidden cultural expectations, all the things that are under the waterline, AI won't help you. And so this is where this notion of lowering the waterline and cultural intelligence is really a skill that is as critical today as learning to embrace AI.
Yeah, no, great points. As you were talking there, we were talking about television again, because I know that's where you started. But at the time of recording, one of Apple TV's new shows, the morning show, new season, morning show has been around a while. Jennifer Aniston's character is actually sort of replicated so she can speak. It's sort of dubbed in, I don't know whether it's 40 or 60 or 80 different languages around the world, but it just shows you the pace of television. And back to when you started your career in Japan in television, we had tools there too. And it brings me nicely onto the next question, because whether it's AI or the latest broadcast tool or being able to clone ourselves and our voices these days, brands, even with all the new information, with all the new technology, they're still making mistakes. I read one only today of a big global brand. I won't name them, but they made a bit of a misstep. It wasn't translated. It was automatically translated. The context Achilles heel that you mentioned wasn't there. It got them into a bit of hot water. And I'm just wondering your views on this, because global expansion it's such a huge opportunity, but it still seems to be have risks built into it if they don't get this right. You must see lots of common mistakes still. What's important here, and how can
Yeah.
people avoid it, Katherine?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It's such a huge opportunity for businesses, and it's not straightforward. So 70%, over 70% of global consumers prefer to buy from brands that share their values, right? Share their values with information in their native language. So we've come back to this. How do those values shift across culture, right? Values are universal: power, performance, trust, but the words are universal, but the expectations shift across culture. And that's where the key thing, if no one remembers anything else of all the stuff we've talked about, is keeping an open mindset, recognizing that what works here won't necessarily work there. It doesn't mean it won't, but chances are high that you'll need to adapt it in one way or another, whether that's simply the currency, the language, but it may be the after service. It may be the media channel on which you communicate with people. I just returned from Europe, and WhatsApp is so common. And for someone who's a global business person like myself, in the US, I use WhatsApp too, but sometimes in the US, people are on text. That just doesn't work globally. And so if you're a global brand, you have to be able to communicate with your customers on the channel where they communicate in different parts of the world in the way that they want to be communicated. And you have a whole section on service, because customer service is the thing closest to the customer. And it's where that brand promise is really put to the test. So you have to learn to flex your customer service to the expectation or beyond. I'm all for, incredible customer service for the customer in their culture. So winning brands think global, right? But they feel local.
I love that. I love it. And of course, we're all about thinking globally, acting locally. It's great. And I know you touch on a lot of these great things in your book, but it's interesting you're talking about texting in the US and also carrier charges in the US being different to other parts of the world. And the debate between blue bubbles and green bubbles and open, and sorry, I was
Oh,
going to say open AI,
gosh, yeah.
Apple or iOS. And then in Europe, as you say, when you get out and go to Europe, people are WhatsApping each other like crazy, So
Yeah.
it's a great example. And I think I want to come back to something. I'm gonna tempt you to come not just a half step, but maybe 3 or 4 steps now, if I can tempt you, because I want to come back to this AI question. I know
Yeah.
everybody's talking AI to death, but the question I've got for you is, as we think 2 or 3 steps ahead, as we think about the future, that from your vantage point, cross-cultural branding, it's certainly going to be evolving again. And when it comes to personalization, I'm thinking more about the rising consumer expectation, concerns. I'm not sure whether that's the right word, but about authenticity, about understanding the values. Some speakers are saying, look, in 12 months from now, 24 months from now, you won't know the difference anyway, whether something's an AI person, whether you and I are actually really here, or are these just our own avatars speaking to each other? And then therefore you won't mind. Other people are saying, no, there's a huge human element required here. It's all about context. It's all about culture. What are you thinking about? Because AI must come up every time you speak at UC
Yeah.
Berkeley, right?
Yeah. Well, I just came from the D-Mexico Digital Marketing Summit in Cologne, Germany. So I was just right in the thick of it. And actually from that experience, I'll tell you, 40,000 people, my rehearsal was right before the Google and Microsoft speeches, and I was invited to speak at center stage at the CMO section on my book, Brand Global, Adapt Local. I talked about brand values, and after listening myself to all the people talking about how any new AI-driven innovation from Google and Amazon and Microsoft and was going to improve people's conversion by X percentage points along every millimeter of the funnel, I thought, oh my God, no one's going to really want to care what I have to say. It was just the opposite. In fact, it kind of shocked me, but certainly warmed my heart that I came out from backstage to where I was going to sign a few books, and there was a line so long that we ran out of books. Everyone wanted books. I was signing until I had to catch a plane on the books that we had. It was really heartwarming. And people were saying, yes, there are all these new metrics and devices and tools that are going to help us convert. But at the end of the day, brands will become more important. To your point, is it real? Is it fake? Is it going to deliver a promise or isn't it? And if the brand doesn't deliver on that promise, the brand value erodes. So it's not going to be so much about how you deliver it. Of course, that's critical, and for all the marketers, if you can save money on your conversion, then there's more to be spent on real customer service. But the idea of your brand and how to make it resonate into that culture is really key. I personally hope authenticity matters, but I don't know if that will be true for generations to come. But the brand has the most to gain and the most to lose, because at the end of the day, the brand is the balance sheet. Right? There is a reason Apple is the most valuable brand in the world.
Yeah, and I think that, that sort of brand saying that it's what people talk about your company when you're not around. That's what the brand is what they think, what they feel, what they experience. It connects with them as a human. And I think that will always be around. It's interesting, ultimately it comes back to brand. It comes back to values. Do I trust this brand? Have I trusted them in the past? Do I trust them in the future? So whether it's AI speaking to you or a human speaking to you, it does come back to brand. It's a great point to end on. Thank you, Katherine. And
yeah,
unfortunately, we've run out of time on this episode of VistaTalks, but maybe we'll do it again. There's definitely a second book coming, right? So we'd definitely talk again.
Sure, love to. We can bring Natalie in sometime and
yeah, Natalie Kelly. Yeah, she's been on the show quite a while back, but it'd be great to get Natalie Kelly back too, for sure. And I'm going to ask everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world, obviously, to like, follow, subscribe, do everything we need them to do. If they want to get hold of the book, they want to find out more about what you're doing, Katherine, where do you want to send them to?
Great. You can find all of it on my website. It's very simple. Speaking of authenticity, www.katherinemelchiorray.com. And there you can both learn about the book, where you can get it. It's available online or in most major bookstores around the world. It's only in English at the moment, but we're working on a French edition. If people are interested, please do let me know. And you can also learn more about cultural intelligence there. Reach out to me. I'm happy to speak with more people and teams about this, because it's something that after several decades doing the work, I now believe in sharing it and paying it forward.
Thank you, Katherine. Well, look, make sure you join me back here for another interesting discussion with interesting people from all around the world, people just like Katherine. And Katherine, thanks for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Thanks so much, Simon. I enjoyed it a lot.